Outside Madison Square Garden, on a cold evening in February 1999, a man was playing guitar for spare change when Bruce Springsteen walked past him, stopped, and walked back. What Springsteen recognized in the way that man held his instrument would lead, 40 minutes later, to one of the most extraordinary moments in the history of his live performances, and would give a man who had not played in front of an audience in over a decade his life back. His name was Marcus Webb. He was 51 years old, and on the evening of February 8, 1999, he was sitting on a folded square of cardboard on 7th Avenue, outside the Garden, with an open guitar case in front of him, containing approximately $14 in loose change and small bills. He was playing a guitar that had been given to him by a shelter outreach worker 2 years earlier. Not a good instrument, the action too high, 2 of the tuning pegs replaced with mismatched parts. But it was the only guitar he had, and he had learned to make it work. Marcus had not always been a man playing for change outside an arena. From 1969 to 1979, he had been a working session musician in New York City, playing guitar on recording sessions for a list of artists that, if you had told the version of himself sitting on the cardboard in February 1999 what that list contained, he would not have believed you, because by then, it felt like something that had happened to someone else. He had played on 3 gold records. He had toured briefly with a soul revue out of Philadelphia in 1973. He had been, for a period of about 6 years in the early 70s, exactly the kind of musician that other musicians wanted in the room. Reliable, inventive, capable of finding the part that the song needed without being told what it was. Then came the things that come, in one combination or another, for a certain number of people in every industry that runs on talent and unpredictability and late nights. A divorce in 1976 that took most of what he had. A drinking problem that had been manageable for years, and then, in 1979, stopped being manageable. Studio work dried up, the way it does for musicians who become unreliable, regardless of how good they remain when they do show up. By 1982, he was doing occasional gigs in bars in New Jersey. By 1985, he was doing almost nothing. By 1990, he had lost the apartment in Hoboken, where he had lived for 11 years. And by 1995, he had been, with various interruptions of temporary housing and brief stretches with relatives who eventually ran out of patience or resources, or both, without a permanent address for the better part of a decade. He got sober in 1996 in a program connected to a shelter on the Lower East Side. He stayed sober, but sobriety did not undo the decade that came before it, did not restore the apartment, or the session work, or the version of his life that had existed before 1979. He was 51 years old in February 1999, sober for 3 years, living in a shelter and playing guitar on 7th Avenue for spare change because it was the only thing he knew how to do that connected him to who he used to be. He did not expect anyone to recognize that. Most people who walked past him on 7th Avenue saw a homeless man with a guitar. This was, on the surface, an accurate description. It was also, Marcus understood, not the whole picture, but he had stopped expecting anyone to look for the whole picture. People didn't, generally. It wasn't unkindness. It was simply how the world worked when you were sitting on cardboard outside an arena. Springsteen was walking from a side entrance toward a car when he heard Marcus playing. He did not stop immediately. He was 30 feet past Marcus before something about what he had heard caught up with him. Not the song itself, which was a fairly simple blues progression, but the specific quality of the playing, a fluency and a phrasing that did not belong to someone who had picked up a guitar recently or casually. It was the playing of someone who had once been very good and had not entirely lost it. The way the body remembers things that the circumstances of a life have otherwise tried to erase. Springsteen stopped walking. He turned around and walked back. He stood at the edge of Marcus's cardboard square for a moment, without saying anything, listening. Marcus, who had played for thousands of indifferent passers-by over the previous several years, did not look up immediately. When the song ended, he did look up, and he recognized who was standing there, and for a moment, neither man said anything. "Where'd you learn to play like that?" Springsteen asked. Marcus said, "Session work, long time ago." "What kind of sessions?" Marcus told him. He named some of the artists. He named the Soul Review. Springsteen listened, and something in his expression changed. Not surprise exactly, but a kind of recalibration, the visible process of a person updating what they thought they were looking at. "You still play regular?" Springsteen asked. Marcus gestured at the cardboard, the case, the $14 in change. "This is regular," he said. Springsteen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Pack up. Come with me." Marcus did not immediately understand what was being asked of him. He asked Springsteen to repeat it. Springsteen said it again. "Pack up the guitar. Come with him." There was a show going on inside, and he wanted Marcus to play. Marcus said he didn't have anything to wear. He said this with the particular shame of a man who has spent years learning exactly which doors are not open to him and has organized his expectations accordingly. Springsteen said it didn't matter what he was wearing. It took convincing. Marcus said this more than once, in interviews he gave years later, that the hardest part of that night was not the eventual walk onto the stage, but the 30 seconds before it, standing on 7th Avenue, trying to decide whether to believe that this was actually happening or whether it was some kind of mistake that was about to be corrected. He had been disappointed enough times, in smaller ways, by smaller promises, that his instinct was caution rather than excitement. But Springsteen did not leave. He waited while Marcus decided, and eventually Marcus picked up his guitar case and followed him through the side entrance of Madison Square Garden. What happened backstage took about 25 minutes. Springsteen brought Marcus to his dressing room, got him a better guitar, one of his own, properly set up, strings that didn't fight your fingers, and asked him what he wanted to play. Marcus named a blues standard, something old, something he had played 1,000 times in a different decade of his life. Springsteen said he knew it. They ran through 16 bars together in the dressing room, just to find the key, just to make sure the timing matched. Marcus said later that those 16 bars, played quietly in a dressing room before anything else happened, were the first time in over a decade that he had played music with another person rather than alone. Springsteen went back out to finish the main set. Near the end of the show, before the encore, he came to the microphone and told the crowd that he wanted to introduce someone. He said the man's name was Marcus Webb, that he had been a session guitarist in New York City in the 1970s, that he had played on records that some of the people in the audience almost certainly owned, and that he was going to come out now and play. Marcus walked out from the side of the stage in the clothes he had been wearing on 7th Avenue, carrying a guitar that was not his, into the largest room he had ever stood in. in front of 19,000 people who had no idea who he was and were about to find out. He was shaking when he started. Springsteen counted it in. The first 8 bars were uncertain. The way anything is uncertain when a body that has not done something in a long time is asked to do it again under pressure that the body has never experienced before. By the second verse, something settled. It was not, Marcus said later, like riding a bicycle, the easy cliché people use for skills that return without effort. It was harder than that, and more emotional than that. It was like finding a room in a house you used to live in that you had forgotten existed, and walking into it and discovering that everything in it was exactly where you had left it. He played for 6 minutes. Springsteen stepped back at one point and let him take an extended solo, watching him the way you watch someone remember something important. And the crowd, most of whom had never heard of Marcus Webb 30 minutes earlier, began to understand, through the playing itself, that they were watching something they did not have the full context for, but could feel the weight of regardless. When the song ended, Springsteen put his arm around Marcus's shoulders, and the crowd gave him a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes. Marcus said later that he did not fully process what had happened until he was back outside, on 7th Avenue, in the cold, with the same guitar case he had carried in. Except that now there was a folded piece of paper in his jacket pocket with a phone number on it, and instructions to call the following week. He called. The number connected him to a music industry contact of Springsteen's who ran a non-profit, assisting musicians who had fallen out of the industry due to addiction, homelessness, or financial collapse, helping with housing, with instrument repair and replacement, with reconnecting people to session and gig opportunities where their skills could still be used. Marcus entered a transitional housing program through the organization in March 1999. By June, he had an apartment of his own, his first permanent address in nearly a decade. By September, he was doing occasional paid session work again, small jobs at first, demo recordings and local projects, nothing like the gold records of the 70s, but real work. Paid work. Work that put him back in rooms with other musicians. He never stopped attending his sobriety meetings. He said the guitar had given him his hands back, but the meetings were what kept the hands steady enough to use. Marcus Webb is 66 years old now. He still does session work, selectively, when projects interest him. He teaches guitar 2 afternoons a week at a community center in the Bronx, mostly to teenagers, some of whom remind him of versions of himself from decades earlier. Talented, unfocused, not yet aware of how fragile a good thing can be if you don't take care of it. He tells his students, sometimes, about the night outside Madison Square Garden. Not as a story about Bruce Springsteen, though it is that too, but as a story about what it means to be seen accurately by someone who could have just as easily walked past. Most people see what they expect to see, he tells them. A guy on cardboard with a guitar case. That's an easy thing to see and an easy thing to walk past. He didn't walk past. He heard something underneath what was easy to see, and he stopped and he turned around. He pauses, usually, after he says this. That's the whole lesson, he tells them. Stop and turn around. You don't know what you'll find. There is a part of that night that Marcus has talked about more than any other. More than the standing ovation. More than the 6 minutes on stage. It is the 16 bars in the dressing room. Before any of it became public. Before the crowd, or the lights, or the introduction. He has described it the same way in every interview he has given since, that those 16 bars were not a rehearsal. They were a test that Springsteen never announced as a test. Springsteen wanted to know, quietly, in a small room with no audience and no stakes, whether what he had heard on the sidewalk was real, or whether it had been a momentary illusion, the kind of thing that sounds remarkable for 8 bars and falls apart on the 9th. It did not fall apart. Marcus played those 16 bars cleanly, with the same fluency Springsteen had heard outside, and something in Springsteen's face, Marcus remembers this specifically, relaxed. Not surprise. Confirmation. The visible expression of someone whose instinct had been right. He didn't say anything about it, Marcus said in a 2009 interview. He just nodded once and said, "All right, let's go do it for real." That was it. That was the whole conversation. But I understood what had just happened. He'd given me a chance to prove I could still do it, somewhere nobody would see if I couldn't. That's a kind of generosity people don't talk about much. The kind where you protect someone's dignity while you're testing them. The outreach organization that Springsteen connected Marcus to was run by a man named Curtis Falk, a former touring bassist who had built the organization in 1991 after his own period of addiction and homelessness in the 1980s. Curtis met Marcus for the first time in March 1999 in a small office in Lower Manhattan, and the two men spent most of the first meeting not discussing services or programs, but simply talking about music, about the sessions Marcus had played on, the musicians he had worked with, the specific texture of a career that had once been real and had then, for complicated and not entirely controllable reasons, stopped being available to him. Curtis told him something in that first meeting that Marcus has repeated many times since, to his students, to interviewers, to anyone who asks him what it felt like to come back from where he had been. Curtis said, "The talent never left. It was just waiting for the circumstances to change." Marcus has built much of how he teaches around that sentence. He does not tell his students at the community center that hard work alone will save them, or that talent alone will save them, because he has lived the specific and complicated truth that neither claim is fully accurate on its own. He tells them instead that circumstances matter enormously, that bad luck and good luck both exist and are not evenly distributed, and that the most important thing he can offer them is not inspiration, but attention. The same kind of attention Springsteen gave him on a sidewalk in February 1999. The willingness to stop and listen for what is actually there, rather than what is easy to assume. He keeps a photograph in his apartment from that night, taken by a fan in the crowd, and sent to him years later through Curtis's organization. In it, Marcus is mid-solo, eyes closed, Springsteen standing slightly behind him with his arm raised, gesturing to the crowd. The universal gesture of a performer directing attention away from himself and towards someone else. Marcus says that gesture is the most accurate single image of what happened that night. Not the music, not even the standing ovation. The gesture of one man pointing the crowd's attention toward another man who had spent a decade being looked past. He keeps the photograph on the wall directly across from where he gives lessons, so that every student who sits down across from him sees it before the lesson begins. Most of them ask about it eventually. He tells them the story the same way every time, ending with the same 2 sentences. "Stop and turn around," he says. "You don't know what you'll find." If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that talent and circumstance are not the same thing. Have you ever been seen accurately by a stranger when you needed it most? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to ring the notification bell for more stories about the moments that remind us why music exists.